3 sheaves of golden grain on black and white squares. Rastello, Carla replied. A county on the southern coast. 50 kilometers east of Dibonai. If they have grain in their heraldry, Liam asked, does that mean they're known for their crops? Yes, the maid nodded. Their title straddles the coast where a few rivers join the sea, and it's known for its fertile farmlands. They're one of the major producers of grain in the south. After wandering around the capital for most of the day to get a feel for things, Liam returned to the Custodio Manor to ask about what he had seen. There, he found Remedios already returned from her shift, performing drills in the courtyard. Upon noticing his return, she charged right up to him, long sword in hand. For a brief moment, Liam thought he was dead, but she only stopped and closely inspected him as if she had expected him to return covered in stab wounds. Once Remedios was satisfied that he wasn't hurt or in some sort of trouble, they went to the manor's drawing room to review his activities for the day. That means the shipment was legitimate, doesn't it? Remedios said. I don't like that they're raising the prices. That's not something that the Holy Order can do anything about. Not necessarily, Miss Custodio, Carla replied. I'm not saying that this is the case, but the fact that House Rastello is well known for its grain exports makes them the best route to avoid notice when moving that type of commodity. But why would other nobles do that instead of shipping it themselves? The maid pressed a finger to her cheek as she tilted her head. I can think of a few reasons, she said. The obvious one to most commoners would be to avoid public anger. No one would be happy about their necessities suddenly doubling in price. House Rastello is powerful enough that they would pay such things no mind. What are the not-so-obvious reasons? Liam asked. The not-so-obvious as well as the most likely reason is that House Rastello has access to ships. Nearly the entire navy, as well as most of the regional trade fleet, was destroyed during the war. The owners of the remaining vessels have a stranglehold on logistics until new ships are made available. Her mention of ships brought to mind something else Liam had heard several times throughout the day. What's this fleet that people are talking about? He asked. The one that's supposed to come in soon? They must mean this year's trade fleet, Carla answered. I'm certain that everyone is resting their hopes on it. I still don't know what it is. It would be easier if I had a navigational chart on hand, Carla said, but it's exactly as it sounds. A fleet that we sorely need for their cargo capacity and ability to trade with nearby countries. Roblé has 3 trade fleets, each composed of over 100 merchant vessels with armed escorts from the Royal Navy. They sail the Great Western Gyre, which takes them down and up the western coast of the continent. They journey south all the way to the Crusader states that border the frozen Dreadlands and then come back up to Argland before returning to the Holy Kingdom. The entire route takes 3 years to sail. So one fleet arrives each year. Before the autumn gale carries them back down the coast again, yes. Yaldabaoth's invasion was rather unfortunately timed. If his demi-human army had invaded while the fleet was still in port, the war would have gone very differently. I don't doubt he did that on purpose, Remedios muttered. Indeed, Carla said. Yaldabaoth was very purposeful when it came to how he initiated the war. Most of the country didn't even realize that all of our generals and their officers had been eliminated in his opening moves until halfway through the conflict. Everyone in the north that might have been considered a commander was gone within weeks. What will the fleet say when they finally arrive? Liam asked. Remedios and Carla exchanged a long look. The maid's lip twitched, though it wasn't out of amusement. They'll be shocked, Carla said. Angry. I think that much is plain. A holiday is usually declared when the fleet comes in to thank the gods of wind and water for their safe return, but I can only imagine that our mariners will only be demanding an explanation as to why their home is half in ruins. To make things worse, the Holy King's brother is the admiral of the next incoming fleet. He'll be furious about Caspon's ascension. It sounded like yet another problem was on its way to complicate Liam's job. He hoped that he could sort everything out before it happened. A footman arrived to inform them that dinner would soon be served. They moved over to the dining room to continue their conversation. Next, Liam said after swallowing a slice of sausage. There's a salt shortage. Maybe that's not right? People are moving salt out of the city. Is there any particular house responsible for this? Carla asked from where she stood at Remedios' shoulder. There was more than one, Liam said. But they didn't go past the city gates. They handed their wagons off to some men on horses with crossbows and spears. Could you describe these men? They looked like farmers, I guess. Los Ganaderos, Carla said. Remedios frowned, looking over her shoulder at the maid. Why would ranchers need spears? I believe the answer should be self-evident, considering the circumstances. The Royal Army was insufficient to police the towns and cities, never mind the rural regions. Los Ganaderos is not only becoming influential economically and politically, but militarily, as well. They consider themselves the new generation of the Holy Kingdom's knights and nobles. How do you feel about that? Liam asked. I think it's admirable, Carla said. You do? I am uncertain why you would think otherwise. Because you're a noble, Liam said. I thought nobles didn't like it when people acted in ways that were above their station. In the dim candlelight, the maid's eyes twinkled in amusement. That may be true in certain cases, she replied. But not in this one. How do you think the Holy Kingdom's nobles came to be in the first place? Intrepid men stepped up to lead their people and defend their lands. It would be hypocritical to look down on those who bravely follow in our ancestors' footsteps. I don't see what's so brave about it, Remedios said as she sawed apart her roast. Back then, they had demi-humans everywhere. The country's rural situation has degraded to the point where banditry has become a very real concern, Carla said. That aside, singular acts of heroism certainly draw the most attention, but they are far from the most difficult part of a noble's duty. We haven't gotten any reports about bandits. Given your review of the daily summary this morning, the maid replied, I suspect that the Holy Order does not receive reports about a great many things these days, Miss Custodio. Remedios forked a slice of roast into her mouth, chewing so vigorously that Liam thought she was imagining herself eating those bandits. Is that something we can use? Liam asked. Figuring out who they are connected to will certainly help you develop a better picture of what's going on, Carla answered. How so? Do you somehow think any livestock in the north survived the demi-human occupation? I see. I don't, Remedios said. From her place behind Remedios' shoulder, Carla smiled quietly as she left Liam to deal with the paladin. It's like I said when we were talking with Anando, Liam said. Those guys are cheating. The men I saw carting salt out of the city probably work for the same nobles that provided the cattle from the south to the ranchers. The ranchers already owe their patrons big for giving them that huge advantage, but the nobles are still smart enough to keep them on a leash to ensure their loyalty. Where is salt from around here, anyway? Salt is one of the main commodities that the merchant fleets bring in from the deserts in the south, Carla said. I could see anyone owning stocks of it dumping them before their arrival. That's a clever move that I hadn't considered before. Huh? This time, it was Liam that voiced his confusion. Carla offered him a recalcitrant, yet teasing look before offering her explanation. A display of elegant efficiency, the maid said. Many types of livestock require salt in their diet, Lanka included. Every noble involved in the cattle industry keeps stockpiles of salt to sell to their tenants. Most prudently purchase more than they need. This may sound strange to you, but storage space is actually a limited thing. Los Ganaderos are not only a new ally for the royalists. They are also a convenient outlet for excess inventories, allowing the nobles to clear their warehouses for the new cargo that the fleet brings in. Where he grew up, people were always concerned about empty warehouses, not full ones. It was a weird problem to have. So are these guys causing a salt shortage, or not? Remedios asked. I suspect not, Carla answered. It's a safe move on the nobles' part. What will probably happen is that cargo space will be prioritized according to the interests of those who own each ship, which will, in turn, cause shortages in less important things. Like food, Liam muttered. Also they can strengthen their connections. That's simply how it works, Liam, Carla said. There are no laws against it and people, aristocrats and commoners alike, generally see to their own business before anything else. Can't the royal court do anything about it? Remedios asked, like ordering the ships to deliver what we need. It can be argued that we need everything, Miss Custodio, the maid answered. The real problem is that the Holy Kingdom's current economy can't support what the royal court's initiatives have set in motion. It may have been a different story before the war, but the South simply cannot fulfill the North's needs in the present day. The only thing I can think of that might alleviate the situation is if the fleet returns and immediately starts importing goods from nearby markets. When I was out around Kalincha, Liam said, I heard that the Sorceress Kingdom was sending food. Doesn't that help? Remedios' expression immediately darkened upon his mention of the Sorceress Kingdom. He still wasn't sure what she had against them. Didn't the Sorcerer King basically save them from Yaldabaoth? I do not wish to sound ungrateful, Carla said, but, as far as I am aware, the average shipment from the Sorceress Kingdom is the equivalent of 5 to 10 fully laden wagons of grain per day. That grain is only enough to feed 8,000 people a day, and that does not include fuel. It is surely a saving grace for the people living on the northeastern fringes of the country, but, by comparison, our ships delivering food, fuel, textiles, and other necessities non-stop across the bay supplement the survival of over 1 million citizens in the north. Liam compared her claim to what he knew. He knew the details about the Sorcerer Kingdom's food aid to the Holy Kingdom. A report that it was being mishandled was the original reason why he was sent to the Holy Kingdom to investigate the country's logistics and internal distribution. Grain pledged to the aid effort left T-Rantle daily. The caravans followed the highway northwest to the capital of Riastais, where their grain was stored in warehouses leased from the local merchants. From there, the grain went southwest to Rirobel, where it was loaded onto a ship leased to deliver the cargo to a port somewhere north of Kalincha. The delivery route drew criticism from several of the Sorceress Kingdom's nobles, specifically its merchant nobles, Countess Corlin, Countess Wagner, and Baroness Gonye. They argued that the plan was absurdly inefficient. The grain could instead be loaded onto a barge in Riastais' capital and sent downriver to the sea, where it would then sail down the coast to the Holy Kingdom. Their amended plan would allow for 2 or 3 times the volume of cargo to be delivered, but the proposal was still turned down. The food aid sent to the Holy Kingdom also served as a political statement, so the Sorceress Kingdom wanted to use a highly visible land route that not only cut through the capital, but also across the middle of the country. Banners were attached to every wagon to inform everyone that saw them of the moral superiority of the Sorceress Kingdom compared to Riastais, which was doing nothing at all to help the suffering people in the Holy Kingdom. Apparently, Countess Corlin had some choice words concerning the morality of letting countless people starve just to make a political statement with what was supposed to be food aid, but the original plan went through anyway. As a political statement, Liam understood how most people would see it. To the average citizen of Riastais, the Holy Kingdom was just a far-off country despite being right next to them. They saw wagons filled with food aid rolling by and would tend to envision themselves or their villages being on the receiving end. 10 wagons was a lot for a single village. Even cities wouldn't look down on that amount. As a result, people saw food being delivered to a place and fulfilling all of its needs, even when the reality was that it was just a drop in the proverbial bucket. Even nobles would think that way, since they wouldn't receive reports on the exact cargo manifest of each caravan. They only received word that food was being sent to the Holy Kingdom from the Sorceress Kingdom and that the Sorceress Kingdom had a lot of food. It was one of the many weird ways that one's mind could fill in the blanks to create an entirely different reality out of what one saw and heard. Ijania trained its ninjas to exploit it, but, even with some of that training, Liam thought that the things he had seen people like Tia and Baroness Sarandike get away with were utterly ridiculous. Can I do that here? Do I even need to? Liam's job didn't require him to involve himself in the Holy Kingdom's problems, but he found the entire situation annoying. Additionally, Captain Montagna, Remedios, and a few other people had also put their trust in him, so he wanted to at least give them something to show for it. He had no idea whether he would ever come back to the Holy Kingdom, but, given his growing familiarity with the place, it seemed likely. Betraying the trust of those in authority would deprive him of potential connections and cause problems on future assignments. Did you take a look at anything else? Remedios asked. I did, Liam answered. But they're all kind of the same. People prioritizing their own business over everyone else's. It doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor, they all act like they're obsessed. That would be the result of the royal court's economic policies, Carla said. You mean the numbers thing that everyone always brings up? It is how most people have come to understand it, Carla said. The sad reality is that, if worth is measured in certain terms, people will start perceiving the world around them in those terms. Normally, those responsible for managing things are supposed to identify and eliminate the problematic behaviors that such measures lead to. The royal court, however, promotes its policies as good in every way, shape, and form, which only serves to reinforce the behaviors that are slowly unraveling our country's social fabric. This is too vague, Remedios said. Miss Custodio. Imagine if soldiers were paid a bonus for every crime that they reported and dealt with. What do you think would happen? They'd work harder to catch criminals, Remedios replied. Is that all? Why would they do anything else? Carla looked across the table at Liam. He thought he knew where she was going with her example. Those soldiers will start looking for anything that might lead to them getting a reward, Liam said. They'll eventually interpret everything that everyone does as a potential crime they might be able to profit from. The more clever soldiers will start working with people to make up crimes and split the rewards. That's crazy, Remedios clenched a fist around her fork. No decent person would do that. I wouldn't be so quick to say so, Miss Custodio, Carla said. There are far too many incidents of overzealous soldiers coming out of basic training acting exactly like that. Rather than pursuing a monetary reward, however, they believe they are fulfilling some sort of sacred charge or trying to satisfy some personal vendetta or sense of justice. We get headaches every year from those types. But that's different. It's not. The crux of the matter is that how people measure themselves and the world around them affects their perception, thinking, and actions. An evil man may perform evil acts to get what he wants, but, in our case, the pursuit of goals like productivity and profit are promoted as unquestionably good by the Holy King himself. There's no reason why one wouldn't engage in the behaviors that reward them. Since the temples side with the Holy King, the people may even see it as a religious obligation. At the mention of the temples, Remedios shifted in her seat with an uncomfortable look. The Holy Order was officially a separate organization from the Temples of the Four, but they were still affiliated. It was a different sort of arrangement from Reistais or the Sorceress Kingdom, which kept the temples out of government affairs, so Liam had no clue what was going through Remedios' head. I'm going out again, Liam said. There has to be something better than all this stuff that people can make excuses for. He wasn't sure how Remedios felt about his lack of results so far, but at least she didn't try to stop him from leaving. After checking around the manor for snoops, it didn't feel right calling them spies. Liam left the Prime Estates out of its western gates. On a whim, he decided to leave Hobans entirely to see what was going on in the camps outside of its walls. Slipping in alongside the wagons lined up to leave the city, Liam watched what happened as people and cargo moved out onto the highway to Rimune. Twilight had already fallen, so he imagined that they wouldn't go far. The first thing that caught his attention was the wooden club that smacked him in the side of the head. Back. The man wielding the weapon roared, I said back, you vermin. Liam sent an angry look in the man's direction. The man wasn't paying any attention to him at all, swinging his cudgel as if he was warding off flies. His tone intensified in volume and aggression whenever anyone strayed too close to the side of the wagon he was escorting. Others who received his ire only whimpered and slunk away, so Liam retreated to a more comfortable distance after passing through the gatehouse. He wasn't the only one with that idea. Hundreds of people waited in the shadows, watching each wagon as it left the gate. When a line of wagons guarded by men in the now familiar colors of House Rostello appeared, the entire crowd shifted to shadow their route. Liam glanced at a boy that seemed to be using him as cover as they made their way through the city of tents. You think we'll have any luck? Liam asked the boy. I don't know, the boy glanced at him. You should be okay. They only pick the biggest. The biggest? I took him a moment to realize his mistake. He wasn't exactly big, but he also wasn't starving. That was enough to make him look imposing to the desperate people around the city. After seeing where the wagons were stopping, Liam located a dark and secluded spot between the tents nearby. Disguise Self. Disguise Self was a first-tier illusion school spell that allowed the caster to alter their appearance in a limited way. It couldn't make one look like a troll, change the sound of their voice, or even fool someone that physically interacted with the illusion. The spell was something like a hollow shell, at best. Despite its limitations, everyone in Ijania agreed that it was the most useful spell that novice assassins could easily pick up, aiding immeasurably with their infiltration techniques. Liam used the spell to make his clothes look dirtier and more ragged. He made himself seem older and thinner and gave his skin a less healthy tone. His hands, arms, and feet were left alone, as they were the parts of the illusion that would most likely come into contact with others. In short, he disguised himself as another version of himself, making the spell especially difficult to see through. It was the best way to use the magic, according to his trainers. So long as he didn't use his mana on anything else, even a novice like himself could maintain the illusion indefinitely. This wasn't a problem at all since it was the only spell that he managed to learn as an assassin. After testing the limits of his new disguise, Liam returned to the crowd around the wagons. Laborers were moving sacks of flour to a makeshift bakery nearby while the escort continued keeping everyone else from getting too close. A handful of them inspected a line of non-uniformed men. Each of those men wore serious expressions and made attempts to appear taller or sturdier. Liam joined the line as a bored voice droned on ahead of him. Yes. No. 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 Yes. No. Yes. No. No. Yes. No. 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 A tall man in chainmail armor and surcoat emblazoned with the heraldry of House Rastello declared each candidate's suitability with an emotionless expression. Those who received a yes were allowed to cross into the secured perimeter. Everyone else was turned away. Failures that didn't move quickly enough received a swift kick to speed them along. The tall man narrowed his eyes as he stopped to scrutinize Liam. Liam looked back up at him. He was nothing like the stupid, lazy men that so many stories made a noble's thugs out to be. A powerful build filled out his armor and shrewd intelligence lit his gaze. Liam did not doubt that he was well practiced with the mace clipped to his belt. The man represented the type of trouble that Liam needed to avoid causing for himself. As the seconds passed, a few of the man's companions casually moved to rest their palms on the pommels of their sidearms. "What's your name, boy?" the tall man asked. "Liam." "Liam?" "Liam, as in Guillermo." There was a snort, followed by a jerk of the tall man's head. Liam crossed in front of him, heading past the line of torches that marked the perimeter. "Not that way," a voice called out to him. "You are Guillermo, yes? I'm Jorge. Follow me." Liam looked around for the owner of the voice, eventually spotting one of the tall man's companions. He went over to follow the skinny, brown-haired man down a different route. "What about all the people that went the other way?" Liam asked. "They're nobodies," Jorge replied. "Sir Luis has an eye for talent, you see, a sharper one than most." "That tall guy is a knight?" "You're not from around here, are you?" "I came from around Kalincha," Liam replied. There were suddenly soldiers everywhere, so. His guide chuckled. "I know the feeling. You made the right choice, coming to the capital. Big things are happening that you'll be glad you didn't miss. Sir Luis is the overseer of this labor camp. Everyone who works and lives here belongs to House Rastello, as you've probably noticed." Liam examined the surroundings as they made their way deeper into the camp. Unlike the chaotic mess that the wagons had passed through outside the gate, things were kept neat and organized and grew more luxurious, relatively speaking, the further they went. He wasn't familiar with how the Holy Kingdom's nobility organized their retainers, but he could still tell that he had stepped into what amounted to a barracks for House Rastello's professional retinue. "I never expected anything like this," Liam said. "I was just looking for work." "And so you have found it," Jorge shrugged. "Isn't this a bit fast?" "That is the way of things in Hobans, now," Jorge told him. "Everything is growing. To keep up, everyone is scrambling for resources and talent. Take too long pondering your choices, and those choices are snatched away. Do not worry over much, you will be put through your paces on the job." They entered a huge pavilion guarded by pairs of armed men at each entrance. Inside were stockpiles of supplies, including bedrolls, tarps, and uniforms. Jorge rummaged through them, placing various items on a table nearby. "Your tent and your bedding," he said. "By your look, I do not think you will receive a uniform. Do you have a girl?" Liam shook his head. "Family?" He shook his head again. "You should find a girl," Jorge told him. "Your starting portion will be enough to support at least one other. Now is the time when any number of pretty girls will gladly keep your bed warm and your tent clean if only to keep their bellies full, though their bellies may become full in another way, eh?" A suggestive grin filled Jorge's face as he finished speaking. Liam made a nominal show of appreciating the man's crass humor. He had a good idea of his situation, now. "When do I start?" he asked. "As soon as you pitch your tent," Jorge answered, Come to the platform with the red canvas near the middle of the camp. Sir Luis will be expecting you. Oh, and don't take too long, our good overseer is anything if not strict. All right, I'm getting somewhere, now. Liam thought that he was, at least. Though he had spent less than 30 minutes in House Rostello's labor camp, what he learned in that time was enough for him to start making sense of how things really worked in Hobans. It was a familiar, yet unfamiliar situation. The unfamiliar part came in the form of the people, one of which was helping him pitch his tent. Thanks, Liam said as he checked to make sure everything was done properly. My name's Liam, by the way. Francisco, the man stuck out his hand. Liam gave the hand a firm shake. It was definitely weird. As Remedios always insisted, the citizens of the Holy Kingdom were mostly good people. It was unlike Facet County where generations of consistently terrible conditions and behavior had transformed terrible into normal. Instead, their normal was still good and they were only starting to slide into the abyss that lay ahead of them. In that sense, the labor camp was a place where people fought to keep their normal. People seemed neighborly, there were no overt displays of belligerence or excess rowdiness, and things were kept in good order. As if this wasn't already complicated enough. Why can't I just have a bad guy to kill? It was something that Remedios would probably say, but the situation in the Holy Kingdom only seemed to get more convoluted the deeper he delved. Liam tied the entry flap to his tent shut before leaving, glancing at the other plots as he walked by. Everyone around him was new to House Rostello, but they took pride in their new positions nonetheless. His surroundings resembled what he thought an army camp might look like, except more lived in. There were 8 tents to a cookfire and many were occupied not only by the new retainers, but also by their women or family members. The deeper he went, the more like a village or town it felt. Women went about doing chores or tending to their children while chatting animatedly with their neighbors over any number of things. It occurred to him that he might become the odd one out if he didn't follow suit and find a girl as Jorge had suggested. He found the platform with the red canvas easily enough. The entire area around was lit by mundane torches and mirrored lamps that were burning some sort of oil. The platform itself looked like some sort of office and was stocked with organized supplies behind a row of tables manned by liveried clerks. Sir Luis was standing behind them, his arms crossed as he surveyed his domain. His hawkish eyes rested on Liam briefly before resuming their stern vigil. Liam went over to stand in front of him, quietly waiting for the man to say something. When he finally spoke, it was to someone behind his shoulder. Duarte, this one's yours. A short, compact man sorting through the inventories along the left side of the platform rose and walked over to stand beside Sir Luis. He was dark of hair and eye like so many of the Holy Kingdom's citizens, with an air that made him indistinguishable from the laborers that endlessly toiled around the city. Liam, Duarte. Sir Luis said, he's in charge of your sort. Duarte, get Liam on the next port run. Got it, Duarte said. Need gear? In response, Liam pulled out the dagger and knife he had picked up shortly after arriving in the Holy Kingdom, as well as a file, a length of wire, and a ring of metal picks. Fortunately, the equipment that Remedios ordered hadn't come in yet or he'd have looked pretty suspicious. Duarte exchanged a look with the overseer. We're not going to steal anything, kid, Duarte said. Our job is to escort the wagons back and forth from Cantor. Liam put his things away. At first, he thought what he had available looked a bit pitiful. Apparently, it was too much. Anything need smoothing out, sir? Duarte asked. We haven't received any reports about it. If so, Sir Luis said before fishing a small purse from his belt and tossing it over. Use that if you need it. The caravan master will handle everything else. The shorter man nodded once before turning on his heel to leave. A small group of men gathered nearby looked over from their low conversation and fell into step behind him. Who's the new guy? One of them asked. Goes by Liam, Duarte answered. Since you're so curious about him, Pedro, you get to be his nanny for this run. His mustache is too big to be my nanny, Liam said. The quip drew several chuckles from the men. She must have been a great beauty, this nanny. Pedro clapped him on the back. Do you know what we're about, Liam? I heard something about escorting wagons. There is little to fear, Pedro told him. We're to make sure no one gets close to take a nip out of the cargo. The caravaneers find it especially hard to spot people at night. People are trying to steal from the wagons? Liam asked. It is a sad thing, I know, Pedro shook his head. But hunger can make a man do things he otherwise would not. Knowing that we're watching out for them is always enough to keep them at bay, however. They arrived at a line of wagons parked outside of the work camp. Only the two at the front were loaded with anything. Pedro handed Liam the torch he was carrying. Unlike the ones illuminating the labor camp, it was the magical sort that miners and adventurers used. Follow me and hold that aloft, Pedro told him. We will come behind the wagons and make sure no one sneaks up on them. You're screening the left flank, Jureid told them. Eh? Pedro visibly cringed. Don't you think that's too much for young Liam to handle on his first run? You have your orders, trooper. Duarte turned and left them to address some other men, clearly not expecting any protest. For his part, Pedro offered none, but the flickering torches nearby highlighted his glistening brow. Don't worry, young Liam, he said. You'll be fine. But will you be fine? The man was clearly worried about something, but Liam couldn't tell what it was. He had been so certain of the ease of their task just moments before. They slowly made their way to the head of the caravan, taking so long that the wagons nearly started moving without them. Should I deactivate the torch? Liam asked. No. Pedro half yelped. No. It is night, yes? It was, but the moon was out and the skies were clear. The torch might help them see a short distance around themselves, but it blinded them from anything further away. Aside from the moon, all he could see beyond their little halo of light were the torches from the caravan and the other escorts. Pedro swallowed as he looked up at the torch in Liam's hand. Liam wondered if he would try to grab the thing. How long are we going to be out of the city for? Liam asked. It is a day through the hills to Cantor, Pedro said. We will rest for a half day while the wagons are loaded, and then we will come back. Liam wondered how Remedios would react when he popped up after disappearing for 3 days. Hopefully, he would have some useful information to distract her with. House Rastello runs things like an army, he said. The camp I came through on the east side of the capital was a mess, so I was pretty surprised. Ah, that would be Sir Luis doing. Pedro seemed to relax further with every word. He made a name for himself in the army, you see. You mean he liked his time in the army so much that he's running things like they would be in the army? Crazy, no? Pedro said, at least for small folk like you and me. Sir Luis is a sir. A knight. His family has served House Rastello for generations. When you and I were still helping our parents out as children, he was learning how to ride and kill. To people like Sir Luis, the army is the place where they stand head and shoulders above everyone else. They often think back fondly upon their time there. That might be true, Liam said, but it looks like the camp is doing well because of it. Things are clean and organized. Lots of people are trying to join. Pedro nodded, a bit of pride filling his expression. Yes, I believe that we will win. You must as well since you are here now. Win? Liam frowned as he eyed a freshly trimmed copse ahead of them. Win what? Why, this game that the nobles have been playing. The ones that the city folk have foolishly been trying to compete in. You and I know better, yes? Only those with wealth and power like the nobles can truly play. Better for people like us to cast our lot with the great lords. To do otherwise would be as futile as rowing against the tide. He hadn't thought about it that way before, though he should have. The vast majority of people in a kingdom were tenants under the nobility, licensees who depended on their favor, worked in their chartered companies, or served directly in their retinues. Its militant atmosphere aside, House Rastello's labor camp was run like a miniature fief. Anyone within its borders was under the protection of a noble house. It had a presiding lord in the form of its overseer, Sir Luis, and policing forces divided between the retinue that Liam had entered and a militia made up of what were basically thugs. Everyone else was a tenant or something along those lines and directly involved in or supporting the camp's industries. As Jorge had stated back in the camp, people were paid in portions. In other words, provisions. Considering what was going on in the country, it seemed like the only reasonable way to do things. Prices changed so drastically that one couldn't rely on being able to pay for a loaf of bread with the coin that they made, so they settled for the loaf of bread instead. In other words, people were doing what they were used to doing. With the Northern Holy Kingdom in the state that it was, the work camps, with their familiar and comfortable hierarchies and practices, offered a return to their lives before Yaldabaoth's invasion. It was definitely far better than the expensive hell that the capital was quickly becoming. Where are you going? Pedro asked. Liam glanced over his shoulder to where the man had stopped in his tracks. We're supposed to make sure the flank is clear, right? Yes, but what are you doing? Checking the edge of that copse, Liam gestured with a wave of his torch, then stared at it for a moment. Actually, hold this. Huh? Anyone that might be hiding in there will see me if I walk up to them with this thing, Liam said. Stay where the others can see you. Pedro gave him a dumbfounded look as the torch changed hands again. You are crazy, he said. Don't you remember army training? Idiots who walk up to bushes get eaten by demi-humans. It's not a bush, Liam replied, it's a copse. Someone just trimmed it, too. There aren't going to be any demi-humans here. How can you be sure? There might be some left over from the war. Liam rolled his eyes and walked toward the copse. That being said, Carla's mention of banditry emerging as a problem out of the sight and reach of the Royal Army did mean that it was prudent to exercise caution. He allowed his vision to adjust to the darkness before creeping forward. Between the long grass and the low light conditions, it was highly doubtful that anyone would be able to detect him. He glanced over his shoulder to see how far the caravan was. The copse was roughly 10 meters from the tracks of the worn clay road, and the clearings on either side of the route were overgrown. A shallow incline slowed their progress as they made their way between the hills, offering poor prospects for escape should the caravan's defenders deem their situation hopeless. The more Liam thought about it, the more favorable the surroundings felt for an ambush. He had to remind himself of his own words to Pedro before he crossed into the woodlot. Despite the lack of a fence, which he figured had been torn down and sold as fuel, the copse was well tended. It was indistinguishable from a copse in Riastais or the Draconic Kingdom, lined with rows of low-lying crowns that looked like they were recently cut. As far as money went, the tenants managing the land probably had no problems surviving. They simply needed to resume their management of the plots of trees that the demi-humans had no appetite for during the occupation. Liam? Liam. Liam winced as his partner called out in his direction. Pedro may have been identified as a rogue, but he didn't have a rogue's sensibilities when it came to stealth. He considered throwing a rock at the man, but the conditions that they were in would make it a sneak attack and probably kill him. Fortunately, he was right about the likelihood of anyone being there to attack them. After skirting the edge of the copse for about 100 meters, he circled back to join Pedro. The nervous man jumped with a terrified shriek when Liam stepped into the light of his torch. Hey, what's going on out there? A voice called out from behind them. Horses neighed as they were jerked to an abrupt halt. Half of the caravan's escorts hefted their weapons while the rest moved their hands to the quivers at their hips. It's just Pedro, Liam called back. We're still clear. Muttered curses drifted back in response and the wagons resumed rolling forward. Liam fell into step beside his partner again. Are you always that jumpy? He asked. It can't be helped. Pedro protested. What would you do if someone just popped out of the darkness like that? Put my weapon between myself and whoever it was, Liam replied. Pedro stared at him with wide eyes. Liam studied his skinny form out of the corner of his vision. Never mind being the most unsneaky rogue ever, his immediate reaction to sudden threats was to panic and scream. The man had supposedly served in Roblay's royal army before, so did that mean they were all like that? At the least, the rogue standing before Liam wasn't much of a rogue. No, that's not right. Aside from not being right, it was an unhelpful way to look at things. To develop reasonable expectations that he could use, he had to think about how the Holy Kingdom's citizens became what they were. Pedro was a rogue, but he was being kept from realizing his full potential by the environment and culture that he lived in. Going by the reactions of most, rogues were seen as evil criminals, and the goodly folk of the Holy Kingdom purposely avoided any actions that might brand them as one. This meant that they probably had no experience picking locks or working with traps and poisons. Any skills that they did develop would revolve around fighting demi-humans or civilian policing duties. The caravan escort was a good example. Rogues were employed for their excellent detection abilities as they would be in army patrols. To the people of the Holy Kingdom, those rogues were identified as scouts. Attacks and techniques that they used against demi-humans would be unthinkable to unleash against humans. There were also abilities that were useful in daily life, such as appraisal and persuasion. Mobility and athletics-related capabilities, such as climbing, swimming, and keeping one's balance while staying mobile would depend on what they normally did. Of course, it was foolish to believe that every rogue in the Holy Kingdom was like that. People like Reynaldo da Silva would probably accept and even encourage a rogue's criminal nature. House Rastello, or at least its labor camp outside of the capital, on the other hand, was not like that. They were stern, but had thus far conducted themselves in a law-abiding and even benevolent manner. That only added to his problems, however. If he chose to stick with House Rastello, he would be working with rogue allies that would be at a severe disadvantage when facing the more unscrupulous houses. On the other hand, sticking with House Rastello gave him a more stable base to work from. It was far less likely that he would be backstabbed, both figuratively and literally, if he stayed his current course. The road followed the bend in the valley, revealing the next set of copses along their route. Liam shelved his thoughts, peering into the distance and wondering how far they had to go. "Is the entire way to the coast like this?" he asked. "Orchards line the road a third of the way down the southern slope," Pedro answered. "Morning will have come by then and there will be no need for us to do this." "Wait, you're not thinking of doing the reckless thing from before, are you?" "We were assigned to screen this flank," Liam said. "We'll get in trouble if we don't." Caught between his imagined and real threats, Pedro fell silent. Liam returned to his position on the forward left flank of the caravan, keeping an eye on the surroundings as he listened to the idle conversation drifting in from behind them. The men didn't seem wary at all, speaking casually on a wide variety of topics. None of those topics were very important in the grand scheme of things. As he suspected, the men who had opted to work for House Rastello had returned to the telltale thinking of a kingdom's rural population. So long as things were stable and no one was starving, they were content to let the nobles do their noble things, confident that their lives would go on no matter what happened high above them. The worst-case scenario would simply mean switching from working for one house to another. Liam's steps paused as a new set of sounds came from ahead. After confirming what it was, he turned and jogged back to the head of the caravan. What is it?" Pedro asked as he went by. "Another bunch of wagons coming down the road," Liam answered. The man cocked his head for a moment before realizing he was being left behind. Duarte looked down from his seat on the front wagon as Liam approached. "Wagons coming from up ahead, sir," Liam said. "I don't hear anything," he said. "I got nothing," the escort walking beside the wagon said. They fell silent for a moment as they tried to confirm Liam's report. Duarte stood on his seat, peering into the darkness. "I hear it," a man on the other side of the wagon said after a minute. Duarte turned and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Tighten it up," he shouted, "we've got incoming." All conversation ceased as the escort scrambled to take their positions near the wagons. Duarte cranked 3 crossbows, placing 2 of them atop the cargo behind him. Not knowing what he was supposed to be doing, Liam walked lamely alongside the wagon, trying his best to look alert. 10 minutes later, a set of torches came into view, resembling a long column of lights advancing up the road. Duarte raised a torch over his head, waving it in wide circles. A torch in the oncoming group waved back with a different motion. "They're ours," Duarte called out. Audible sighs of relief rose from behind them. "Sorry," Liam said, "I should have confirmed who it was." "You did what you were supposed to do," Duarte said. "You're not wearing house colors, so getting close to 'em might have gotten you killed." He wasn't so sure about that. Duarte's group took significantly longer to detect the incoming wagons than Liam had. If they represented the average security detail from House Rastello, he was confident that he would have gotten away undetected. The wagons didn't stop as they passed one another that night, but a man in house colors hopped off of the other side's lead vehicle. "I'll catch up," he told his people. "Cortez," Duarte nodded. "What's ahead of us?" "Harvest started," Cortez replied. "House Cohen's on security." "Damn," Duarte spat. "They got all of them?" "All that we could see. I figured they'd be ahead, but I still expected a mix." "They give you any trouble?" "There are 2 barons and 100 knights overseeing the harvest, so they know it'd be our fight to lose." "What about things on your end?" "Nothing," Duarte replied. "It's quiet all the way to the western gate." With that, the man turned with a wave and jogged back to catch up with the head of his caravan. Liam silently counted the number of wagons as they went by. "Will House Cohen give us trouble?" he asked. "Why would you think that?" Duarte asked back. "Our cargo's valuable, right?" Liam said. "Everyone's getting crazier and crazier over valuables." "In the city, sure," Duarte told him. "But that's not how the game's played between the nobles. House Cohen's claimed responsibility for the lands around Cantor. If caravans start getting raided, that's on their heads, and you can bet your ass that the other nobles will jump at the chance to knock them off of their comfy perch. They need to keep things nice and orderly or they lose face in court." It took an hour for them to pass the end of the other caravan. Liam returned to his position, wondering why the caravans needed such a large escort to things were as Duarte had asserted. They crossed 2 more caravans before making it over the pass. On the other side, the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky, and Liam could barely make out the bay separating the northern Holy Kingdom from the south. Dotting the coast on both sides were the lighthouses that marked every port and hazard. 3 hours more saw them entering the orchards that Pedro had mentioned. Duarte called everyone in as a pair of riders in chainmail armor cantered up the road toward them. One of them bore a tall banner and they both wore circuits dyed in the red and blue stripes of House Cohen. Once they reached the front of the caravan, they wheeled their war horses around and walked them alongside the lead wagon. "Toll," the one closest to Duarte said. 5 copper per wagon. With 100 wagons in the caravan, that still added up to a lot. "What's your name, sir?" Duarte asked. "Escada." "Since when are tolls collected right on the damn road, Sir Escada?" Duarte asked. "You know how it is," Sir Escada answered. "House Cohen won the security rights over this territory, but their rivals still found a way to make themselves a pain in the ass. We got the land and the roads, but we didn't get the customs office in Cantor." Duarte snorted and laughed. Liam couldn't quite believe how cordial their exchange was. "Well," Duarte said as he pointedly eyed the tracks cut deep into the road by the passage of countless wagons, "your road is shit, either way." "We're already working on it," Sir Escada said. "Don't worry, we'll start taxing your freight along with your wagons once we finally get the office." Their caravan's toll dropped into Sir Escada's awaiting gauntlet. The 2 knights didn't immediately leave as Liam thought they would, instead continuing to accompany them south to the port. Not long after, they went by the first group of laborers bringing in the summer harvest. Hundreds of them were spread across the orchards to either side, delivering baskets filled with fruit to the roadside. Liam watched as a girl around his age set down her load nearby. She picked up a bright red nectarine from the top of her basket and bit into it, smiling the biggest smile ever as juice dribbled down her chin. If it were the Sorceress Kingdom, an elder lich would have probably flown down and pestered her for that. They hated it when people messed up the numbers. "Hey, girl," Duarte called down as they rolled by, "how much for a basket of those?" The girl held up a hand and lay 2 fingers against her palm. Duarte fished out 2 gold coins and 8 silver ones from his purse, holding them out in Liam's direction. "Grab 4 baskets," Duarte said. "Pass 'em down the line." Liam grabbed Pedro, who motioned for 2 others to join them. The girl grinned at him as he gave her the coins, a piece of fruit still stuck in her teeth. "Wait a minute. I think that was all an act to get you to buy some fruit," Liam said after he returned to the lead wagon. "No shit," Duarte said. "It's still 10 times cheaper than it'd be in the city. They sold us all the ones that were getting overripe anyway." "You knew all that before telling me to buy them?" "Yeah. I grew up on a farm like this, after all. I know all their tricks." "Well, thanks for the fruit." Dante cast him a sidelong glance. "I didn't just buy 'em to get on everyone's good side." "Really?" Liam frowned. The wagons had carried rations for its escort, so he figured it was just a nice treat. "If you plan on getting ahead," Duarte told him, "you better learn quick. I don't know half of the men in this escort, and that includes you. I'm letting you stuff your faces right now to curb any thoughts of pocketing some peaches for yourselves along the way. That thing I talked about a while ago works both ways. House Cohen would simply love it if someone from House Rastello was caught causing trouble on their watch." Liam eyed the knights riding alongside them, as well as the men-at-arms stationed regularly along the road. None of them reacted in any way to Duarte's words. The sun was touching the western sea by the time they reached Cantor. It turned out that roadwork had indeed begun. The 2 knights who had accompanied them through the orchards to the port offered a sharp salute before riding back the way they came. It was only as he watched their shrinking banner flutter in the evening light that all of the pieces fell together. Will it even be possible to topple these guys? Whenever people mentioned the establishment, caricatures of greedy aristocrats and their idiotic thugs came to Liam's mind, evil people who heedlessly piled up atrocious acts as if daring justice to come down on them like a hammer. He couldn't have been more wrong. That image was just one concocted by a naive kid who thought that he had the power to bring change, or maybe by bards spinning tales of villains whom the audience could easily hate. Liam, of all people, should have known better. Better for people like us to cast our lot with the great lords. To do otherwise would be as futile as rowing against the tide. The true establishment was not just the nobles, but everyone who worked for them. Every man wearing their colors and every tenant laboring on their land. Its members didn't have to be a great knight like Sir Louis, they could just as easily be a girl selling overripe peaches to passers-by. The point was that they all worked towards the prosperity of the house that they served, for their own prosperity was dependent upon it. That establishment, formed out of all of those houses, played by the rules. They didn't need to do anything else because the rules were already on their side. The greatest, most ambitious houses of the Holy Kingdom were in Hobans, and with them came the best and brightest of the Holy Kingdom. The reality of things was that Liam was just as powerless as he had been against House Fassett. He was a single, small piece in a conflict that involved millions, and he seriously doubted that he would ever find an angle to exploit.